Today we begin this understanding of yoga as described in the Dhyana Yogi as described in the Bhagawad-Gita. It is a subject matter essentially of the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. Now you must understand that the yoga that is described in the Bhagavad-Gita is in no way the yoga or the yoga which is practiced by people that you normally see in what is called postural yoga or hatha yoga. The yoga that is described in the Bhagavad Gita is one of the most ancient forms of the darshanas of the Vedas. And the most ancient form of the darshanas of the Vedas is a companion to Sankhya, which is as old as yoga. So Sankhya forms the subject matter of study, which is it talks about the metaphysics of liberation, talks about the metaphysics of who we are and how to attain liberation. It discusses Purush and Prakriti, it discusses Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, and so on and so forth. It is the process of enumeration, but dissection and enumeration of everything in the world so that by understanding the components that make up the items in the world, we will not be attracted to them. For example, if you see an attractive member of the opposite sex, but you see them as so much water, so much bile, so much stool, so much urine, so much of a bag of skin, you will definitely lose interest. So Sankhya is the enumeration of different parts. Bhumi, Apon, Alo, Vayur, Kham, Mano, Buddhire, Vacha. Ahankara, Ityam, Me, Bhinna, Prakriti, Ashtada. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, ego. These are all part of the inferior energies of the Lord. So that is Sankhya. Yoga is the practical application of these principles of philosophy of the Yoga Darshana. And it is that application of the philosophy which is having purified the mind through work, having purified the mind through Sankhya Yoga, then one sits down in meditation, and through meditation, then one gradually attains to that realization of the Supreme Absolute Truth. So Sankhya is the theory, Dhyana Yoga is the practice. And the union of these is one of the ancient applications of the darshanas to attaining union with God. Unfortunately, these forms of both Sankhya and Yoga were being done as renunciatory philosophies. That one gave up one's duties, responsibilities, family, friends, society, nation, and all one's duties, so that one could apply oneself to Sankhya and then apply oneself to Yoga. Therefore, in the sixth chapter, when Krishna is beginning to describe what is Sankhya, Krishna very, very, very clearly states, and he begins. And how does he begin? He begins by pointing out that the one who works is the real yogi, not one who has ceased to work. So, yes, Sankhya and Yoga, prior to the Bhagavad Gita, required renunciation of the world. But Krishna, being an upholder of dharma, one, the Supreme Lord who has incarnated on this earth to preserve dharma, will never ask you to give up your swadharma. He will never ask you to give up your duties and responsibilities. And therefore, Krishna starts this sixth chapter on Dhyana Yoga by specifying that work is all important. Lest you forget what he has already taught you in the previous section. Shri Bhagwan Uvacha Anashritah Karma Phalam Karyam Karma Karoti Yah Sa Sannyasi Cha Yogi Cha Na Niragnir Na Chakriyah. One who is not attached to the fruits of his work and who performs his God given duties is in the renounced order of life. And he is the true yogi, he is the true mystic, not one who lights no fire and performs no work. This is very important. Krishna is saying that the true yogi, the true sannyasi, is not one who has given up his duties, his work, his performance of his Vedic karmas, but one who continues to do his work without seeking the fruits of his labor. So, if you work in the world in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion, and you do it in a spirit of renunciation, then you are the real sannyasi, you are the real yogi, not the guy who shaves his head, wears orange robes, and roams the streets. He is not, or lives in the temple, or lives in the monastery. You are the real sannyasi, you are the real yogi. So, right here in the beginning of the sixth chapter, Krishna is emphasizing the importance of doing one's work and performing one's duty. And he goes on to reiterate it by saying, Yam sannyasam iti prahur yogam tam vidhi pandava na hi asanyashta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. What people call sannyas is the same as yoga, which is yoga is connecting yourself with the divine, with the supreme divine. Linking yourself with God is called yoga. It is also the same as sannyas. And one can never attain that when one is full of desires for the world. So, unless you give up all the desires and for the things of the world, sankalpo, you cannot become a yogi. Na hi asanyashta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. When you give up desires for the things of the world, when you give up the desires for sense gratification, when you give up the desires to control and possess the things of the world, when you give up the desires to show that you are better than other people, if not materially, then spiritually, then and then only can you connect with God in and through yoga. Now, for the first time in the Bhagavad Gita, And you'll find it very difficult to find a similar verse elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is pointing out that at some stage you have to transcend work in order to attain to yoga. Aru ruksher muner yogam karma karanam uchyate yoga rudhastasya eva samaha karanam uchyate. So those who have begun the process of yoga, you need to work, because work is the means to purification. But one who has already attained to yoga, then cessation of all activities, material activities in the world, is said to be the means. So this is very, very important because it's a very unique verse. Elsewhere, Krishna has said, Sanyasastu Mahabhavo Dukkham Aptum Ayogatah. If you give up your work or your duties or your responsibilities without having attained union with God, without yoga, then you will get only sorrow. Similarly, Krishna describes here, when he's describing what is yoga, he says in the beginning you need to purify yourself through work. And after you have purified yourself through work, when you have attained yoga, yogam aptum, sanyasastu mahabhavo, dukkham aptum ayogatah. Yoga yukta munir brahma, achirenadi. So, yoga yukta means one who has already attained to yoga can cease, can stop his material activities or duties, which of course Krishna has already said in the third chapter. You should not do according to Krishna's philosophy, because Krishna has pointed out in the third chapter that karmanaivi samsiddhim astita janakadaya loka sangraham evapi sampashyam kartum arhasi. Even kings such as Janaka attained perfection through the performance of work, and they continue to act as such for the benefit of society. Yad yad acharati shreshtas tad tad evataro jana sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanu vartate. So similarly, Krishna has said earlier that even if you attain to yoga, Krishna's advice to his devotees is continue to work in the world. But now he is giving the philosophy of Dhyana Yoga or yoga itself. And this yoga which he is describing is a form of yoga which requires the cessation of work and engagement in full-time meditation. As I said, Krishna in this Bhagavad Gita is uniting all the six darshanas of the Vedas, and therefore Sankhya forms the backbone, and yoga is also mentioned as an essential part of the six darshanas. So while Krishna has started the chapter by clearly stating that work is most important, he has to state here that for those who are engaged in, who have attained to yoga, for them, meditation is the means through the cessation of performance of his everyday duties. Yada hi na indriyarteshu na karmasva anusajjate sarva sankalpa sannyasi yogarudas tadochate. So in the fourth text of the sixth chapter, Krishna says, that a person is said to have attained yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he has given up all material desires. He neither acts for the gratification of the senses nor does he engage in fruitive activities. He does not engage in work for the fruit, and he does not engage in the work for enjoyment or pleasure either. Now, this is very important, the verses I am going to cover, because this understanding of these verses depends on your understanding of Sanskrit words as used in context. The words in Sanskrit acquire different meanings according to the context in which they are used. People who don't understand it and who are working simply on the basis of a Sanskrit editor are bound to mistranslate the following verses. Now, please take note, if you are carrying a Bhagavad Gita, that the word Atman means many things. In fact, there's a whole book on the change of meaning of words throughout the Upanishads. So, Atman at one stage in the Upanishads talks about Atman as breath. Elsewhere, talks about Atman as the body. It talks about the Atman as the mind. It also talks about Atman as the soul. And it talks about Atman as the super soul. All these different meanings depend upon the use of the word in the context. So it requires an understanding of the context before you start understanding what the verse means. So, udhared atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadyet, atmaivi atmano bandhur atmaiva ripur atmanah. So here, Atman means the mind. A man must elevate himself by his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the soul, and it is his enemy as well. So you will see Atmaiva Ripur Atmanah. Atmaiva hi Atmano Bandhur. So the mind can be a friend of here, Atmano means soul, and Atmaiva Ripur Atmanah. So it can be a friend of the soul, it can be an enemy of the soul. So in text 6, he points out, Bandhur atmana atmanastasya yenatmaiva atmanajita anatmanastu shatrutve vartet atmaiva tu shatruvat. If you have conquered your mind is the best of friends. But if you have not conquered the mind, if you have failed to conquer the mind, your own mind will be your worst enemy. This is a huge, huge statement. If you conquer your mind is your best friend. If you don't conquer your mind, or if you fail to conquer your mind will be the greatest enemy. There's a famous story of Prahlad sitting on the lap of his father Hiranyakashipu. And Hiranyakashipu is describing to his son, oh, this enemy I killed so many days back, this enemy I killed yesterday, This enemy I killed today, and that enemy I will kill tomorrow. And Hiranyakashipu is intoxicated having conquered so many enemies. And his son looks at him and he says, "My dear father, please understand that you have no enemies. Indeed, you have only one enemy. The rest do not exist. And your only enemy is your enemy, which is your unconquered mind. Your only enemy is your uncontrolled mind." This is something to think about, that your mind is your greatest enemy when it is uncontrolled, when you fail to control it. But your mind is your greatest friend when you have managed to control it. Jitatmana prashantasya paramatmaha samahitah sitoshena sukha dukheshu tatha manapmanayo. For one who has conquered his mind, God is already reached. Paramatma, the God in your heart, the Lord in your heart. If you conquer your mind, the Lord in your heart is already reached. Shitoshna sukha dikheshu tatha manapmanayo. And if you have conquered your mind and your God in your heart is already reached, then heat and cold, joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor, they're all the same. So all of us, we carry the Lord within our hearts. And because we are so obsessed by ourselves, we are unable to turn to God and receive His blessings and guidance. In the Bhagavad-Geeta, Krishna says, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriday deshe arjuna tishtati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantararudani maya tam eva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapshashi shashvatam. Krishna says, I am seated in your heart and I am driving you onward towards your destiny. You are merely seated in a machine made of material energy. Simply surrender unto this Lord in your heart and you will attain peace, perfection, and the supreme destination. So, by listening to the Lord within our heart, we attain peace, perfection, and the supreme destination. By conquering our minds, we are able to hear that Lord. And we become immune, invulnerable to heat and cold and joy and sorrow and honor and dishonor. This is the status of the yogi. He is becoming to that explanation. Jnana Vijnana Triptatma Kutastho Vijayatendriya Yukta Itya Uchyate Yogi Samaloshrashma Kanchana. So he says Jnana Vijnana. You should know the difference between both. Jnana is what you receive through hearing, Shravana. Then you think about it, Manana. Then you meditate on it, Nididhyasana. And after you have thought about it and after you have meditated intuitively on the essence of the meaning, you will get Vijnana. So Krishna explains that one who has knowledge and realization, and thus he is fully realized. Therefore, he has attained the status of Kutastho. Please note the word here, Kutastho. If you have a book with you of Bhagavad-Gita, underline this Kutasto. Kutasto means the anvil of a blacksmith. What the blacksmith does is that he takes an iron object, he puts it into the fire until the iron becomes molten. It becomes red hot and malleable. And when it has become red hot and malleable, when it has become molten, he puts it on the anvil. And then with a hammer, he beats it into the shape he wants. Now, the beauty of it is that this red hot substance is placed on the anvil, on the blacksmith's anvil, the stone on which he beats it into shape. And despite the fact the red hot metal is on the anvil, despite the fact that the hammer of the blacksmith is pounding on it, the anvil remains unaffected. Thus, the Kutasto represents one who has attained that state of being situated in self realization, who has been situated on the spiritual platform. So, Jnana Vijnana Triptatma, one who is having both knowledge and realization, fully satisfied, who is God realized, who is sensually controlled, Vijit Indriya, Yukta iti uchyate yogi. Such a person is said to be united with God. And for him, Samaloshrashma Kanchana. And he sees with equal vision both rocks and gold. He has the same emotional value for both rocks and gold. He's not stupid. He knows what is rock and what is gold. He knows what is valued by the people who are worldly minded and that they will value gold and they will not value rocks. He knows what they are. But for him, he has the same emotional value for both because he has no desire for the things of the world unless they are useful in the performance of his swadharma. So, the first stage of the yogi is when he begins to become indifferent to the inanimate things within the world, pebbles, stones, gold. But a yogi is said to be even more advanced when he is the same way with human beings. See, you can be indifferent towards material things in the world, but you will be disturbed by human beings. Whether they're your friends, they'll make you feel good. If you have enemies, they'll make you feel bad. If you have a saint, you will feel deferential and reverential. On the other hand, if you find a sinner, you will look at him with distaste. But if you attain that state of yoga, not only will you become indifferent to material things, seeing stones and gold with equal vision, but Surin Mitrarya Udasina Madhyastha Dvesha Bandhushu Sadhushu Apicha Papeshu Samabuddhir Vishishyate. Then he will look upon a well-wisher, a friend, an affectionate friend, an enemy, one who is neutral, one who is a mediator between you and the enemies. Those who are hating you, those who are among your relatives, and your well-wishers and friends, those who are pious and those who are sinners. You will look at them with equal mind. You will have the same emotional state when you deal with all of them. Because internally you have begun having attained union with God, you will become indifferent to the various values that they represent. And therefore, just like you look upon stones and gold with equal vision, you will look upon saint and sinner and friend and enemy, etc., with equal vision. Yogi yunjit satatam atmanam rahasi stitah एकाकी यत चित्तात्मा निराशिर अपरिग्रह. So now Krishna is beginning that aspect of how yogi does live when he is preparing for meditation. So we will cover this the next time. So does anyone have any queries, questions, comments about what we have covered today?
Namaste, Shantanu. Thank you so much for today's enlightening session. My first question is, can anyone become a Dhyan Yogi, or are there specific qualifications that are required according to the Gita?
Dhyana Yogi requires that one should have engaged in long practice of work to purify oneself. And having purified oneself, both through working in a spirit of devotion and renunciation, that is Karma Yoga, and also having focused his mind through Sankhya Yoga, having thus completely purified himself and become a yogi, he has prepared himself for meditation. So meditation is difficult because the mind is untrained. But one who trains the mind through Karma Yoga, as well as through Sankhya Yoga, which is Jnana Yoga, thus having silenced his mind, is ready for meditation.
And my second question to you, Shantanu ji, is, considering the fast-paced world that we live in, how can one integrate the teachings of Dhyan Yogi into daily routines?
The fast-paced work is no different from the work that was there in the past. What is important is that you learn Karma Yoga first, absorb yourself in Karma Yoga. And if you absorb yourself in Karma Yoga, that is sufficient for you. There is no need to go into Dhyana Yoga. Krishna, because he is including in the Bhagavad-Gita all the six darshanas of the Vedas, has mentioned Dhyana Yoga here. But you will see in the first verse that he mentions that work is the most important. And then in the end, he says that of all yogis, the best yogi is one who is united in devotion to the Lord, Supreme Lord. So it is mentioned because for completeness, Krishna is beginning all these things together. And not everybody is inclined towards meditation. Krishna wants us not to be a meditator, he wants us to be like Janaka. He wants us to set an example to the rest of the people. When we go ahead, you will see in chapter 12.12 that Krishna says in 12.12 that Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasaj jnanad dhyanam vishishyate dhyanad sarva karma phala tyagas tyagat shantir anantaram. Krishna says that better than ritualistic worship is knowledge. Superior to knowledge is meditation. But he says superior to meditation is working in a spirit of renunciation and devotion. because such work in renunciation leads to everlasting peace.
Thank you so much, Shantuji, for today's enlightening session. And I would request all our viewers, if you liked our session, then please like and share this video with your friends and family. And do join us next Thursday at 8 a.m. for yet another enlightening session on the Bhagavad Gita. Namaste.
Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.